Facial recognition technology has quietly been growing more powerful for decades. But a company called Clearview AI is taking it to new levels of accuracy that could end privacy as we know it.
This one investor said, the way that you Google someone now, I hope that one day you say you Clearviewed them, you searched their face, and you found out everything about them there is to know online. What Clearview AI did wasn't a technological breakthrough, it was an ethical one. They were willing to do what other companies hadn't been willing to do.
In her new book, Your Face Belongs to Us, New York Times reporter Kashmir Hill unmasks facial recognition and the pioneers who were speeding down a dangerous road with very few guardrails.
I think we are at a moment right now where the technology is worrisome, and we need to figure out a legal and policy infrastructure for it to make sure that we get the best of the technology and not the worst.
Kashmir Hill, welcome to St. Louis.
Thank you so much.
Really enjoyed the book, although enjoyed is maybe not the right word. Terrifying? Were you going for terrifying?
Mm-hmm.
It worked.
Yes. I am often told that my writing is fascinating but very disturbing.
And you've been doing it for a long time. How did you end up on this particular beat?
I started covering privacy about 10 years ago, kind of because I came later to journalism. I was in my late 20s, and I was a blogger for a kind of tabloid legal blog where I was writing about lawyers and law students and judges and people who weren't necessarily usually subject to that kind of coverage. And it just made me think a lot about privacy and how it was changing in the internet age. And I started a blog called The Not So Private Parts when I was in journalism school, and it's just become my beat since then.
Well, and it's fascinating, and the book begins with sort of a pretty long history of how long this has been going on. I had no idea. I thought maybe since September 11th, it was something that kind of got stepped up. But this goes back like to the 50s or the 60s.
Yeah, there were engineers working on this in Silicon Valley before it was even called Silicon Valley, and they were getting funding from the CIA. This has kind of been a dream for a very long time to be able to identify a stranger, put a name to a face, put an alert on someone's face and spot them in a crowd. The technology has come a long way. It was very flawed for a long time, so we didn't really have to think about dealing with it all the time in the real world. But now that it's so powerful, it's part of why I wrote the book. I think we need to decide, how do we want it to look in our lives? How widespread do we want it to be? And it's really this balance with safety, security, and then being able to maintain our anonymity and our sense of privacy.
So the story of the book involves a company called Clearview, which I had never heard of before. I imagine most people probably have never even heard of it before. They've been doing this for a little while, and it's getting a little spookier by the day.
Yeah. So the book started for me in the fall of 2019. I got this tip, an email from someone I knew, a public records researcher, who had discovered the existence of Clearview AI in a public records request to the Atlanta Police Department. And, there was a legal memo there. It was marked privileged and confidential. And I'm reading it, and it's describing what Clearview AI has done, that they scraped billions of photos from the public internet, from social media sites like Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn, all of our photos, without anyone's consent, and they were selling it to hundreds of police departments. And I, like you, had never heard of Clearview AI before, even though I work in this area. And I thought, wow, if this is true, I need to get to the bottom of this, because this is really wild.
And they sort of ghosted you at first when you were trying to get to them.
Yes, Clearview AI was definitely trying to stay under the radar. There was not any information about them really on the internet. They did have a website, but it didn't even say what they did. It just said artificial intelligence for a better world. And there was an address on the website, and it was in New York City, just a few blocks away from the New York Times where I work. So I went over to try to check it out. And I got to where Google Maps sent me, and the building wasn't there. It just didn't exist. They had apparently a fake address on their website. I tried finding the people connected to the company, and it was very difficult to figure that out. Everyone who was connected to the company, including, I'd seen online that Peter Thiel, the very famous venture capitalist, might be an investor. And he, like everyone else I reached out to, just wouldn't respond to my inquiries. This company was exposing all this information about each of us, but they wanted to stay in the shadows.
Well, and the main guy who seems kind of shadowy is Wonton Tat, Australian, but has been here since, late teens, as I recall from the book.
Yes. Wonton Tat, he grew up in Australia and then at 19 years old dropped out of college and moved to Silicon Valley, to San Francisco.
Right. So you finally did get him to talk to you a few times. How did that happen?
So I, was trying to figure out who was behind Clearview AI, and Clearview AI did not want to talk to me. And so I had gone to police officers that I found were using the app and talked to them, and they said, it's incredible. It works like nothing we've used before. And police departments have had facial recognition technology going back a couple decades now. But they said, this works when somebody's wearing sunglasses or a hat or they're turned away from the camera. And basically every police officer was so excited about it. But shortly after I would talk to them, and they would offer to run my photo in the app and show me my results, all these police officers were ghosting me. And I didn't know what exactly was going on, but it turned out that Clearview AI had put an alert on my face and that they were tracking me. And they knew every time a police officer uploaded my face, and they would call the police officer and tell them to stop talking to me. And that was pretty chilling.
Yeah, that's not creepy at all.
And the way that I really got them to talk to me was that, that the fact that I talk to police officers now, I know the app actually works. That created kind of some pressure for the company. I also tracked down another investor besides Peter Thiel. I doorstepped them, and they didn't want to talk to me. They told me Clearview AI's lawyers had told them not to talk to me, but I was very pregnant at the time. And I kind of showed off my belly and said, I've come so far here. And so they sat down with me and they started telling me how excited they were about Clearview AI and how the company wasn't just going to sell this to the police. The police were excited about it, but the company wanted to sell it to companies, to hotels, to shopping malls, to airports, and to all of us. This one investor said, the way that you Google someone now, I hope that one day you say you Clearviewed them, you searched their face, and you found out everything about them there is to know online.
Is that legal? I suppose it must be.
Well, this was what that legal memo was about that was in that first public records request. Paul Clement, he's a former U.S. Solicitor General, now in private practice, very expensive lawyer. Clearview AI had hired him to write this legal memo for the police, explaining to them that they wouldn't break the law by using Clearview AI. And it said basically, don't worry, this doesn't break any national laws, doesn't break any state laws, you're fine. That wasn't exactly true. There are some states that regulate this activity, basically one, Illinois. But yeah, in the rest of the United States, at this point, it seems like it's okay that Clearview AI has done this. They haven't really faced major backlash for this really unprecedented database that they have created of 30 billion faces.
It's different in Europe, right?
In Europe, when I exposed the existence of Clearview AI, privacy regulators announced that they were investigating it, also privacy regulators in Canada and Australia. And they came to the conclusion that Clearview AI had violated their privacy laws and that they needed to get citizens' consent to gather all of these photos, subject them to face recognition searches. And so Clearview AI is not doing business anymore in those countries, but still doing business here in the U.S.
Well, and the fact that they have those privacy laws, why don't we have one in the United States?
That is a great question. And a lot of activists ask that question. And I try to track that in the book to tell this story about specifically face recognition technology. And I mark all these moments where policymakers, activists, technology companies have kind of gathered in Washington, D.C. to talk about this. And sometimes they're just really strange political bedfellows. You'll have Dick Armey, very conservative politician, teaming up with the ACLU in 2001 after face recognition technology was deployed for the first time at a big event at the Super Bowl.
The Snooper Bowl, I think you'd refer to it.
The New York Daily News called it the Snooper Bowl. And they were really upset, and they said, technology like this can really threaten our civil liberties, and people shouldn't be just tracked this way. You have a right to privacy in your face. But then September 11th happened, and instead of pushing back against facial recognition technology, there was a push by the federal government to make it better, to deploy it in airports. And so there's just been this constant push and pull between privacy and security. And so often security wins out.
So how does it work? What is it mapping? You said wearing sunglasses doesn't seem to make any difference. I mean, can you wear a disguise or change the color of your... It sounds like I'm planning a cape, or I'm not. But, how does it work, and what doesn't it work on?
So I've had Clearview AI searches run on me. And, Juan Tontat, the CEO, who I did eventually get to talk to me, he'll just take a photo of me, and it starts pulling up photos that I've been in from around the web. So it'll be my social media profiles, my profile at the New York Times. And sometimes it'll be me just in a crowd photo, like a concert I was at, of a photo I didn't realize was on the internet, me walking in the background of someone else's photo. Just very surprising results. And I said, well, was it work? If I cover up my face, is it going to work on me now? And even then, it still got results. And it's pretty wild. There's actually, so Clearview AI is limited to police, but this kind of face recognizing cat is starting to kind of scratch its way out of the bag. And there's other public face search engines now, including one called PimEyes. So I can actually, if you want me to, I can take your photo right now and show you the results that would come up.
You know what? I saw that in your book, and I did it.
Oh, you did it?
Scary.
What did you find? What came up?
Pictures of me. Lots of pictures of me. And then I did a friend, because I was on television for a number of years, so it didn't surprise me that there were pictures of me out there. But I did a friend who wouldn't necessarily be out there, and got all kinds of pictures.
Yeah, it's really astounding. And I don't think people realize how powerful the technology is and the way that it is starting to be very accessible to anyone.
Was there an age range? If I showed my high school photo when I had a little bit more hair than I have now and wasn't wearing glasses and so forth, would it recognize that, do you think?
I have seen it recognize people over a very large span of time. Yeah, it does. It can be very powerful. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. At the end of the day, it's a computer. It's gathering information about all kinds of areas of your face, like at the pixel level in a photo. But yeah, I did have a friend who he took a photo. So this was a photo from the old days where it was taken with film and it had been printed out. And he took a photo of it and said, can you run this through PimEyes? And, this is from the early 2000s. This is from 20 years ago. And I said, who's in this photo? I want to get consent from them before I run their face. And he's like, that's me. And I didn't recognize him, even though I know him quite well. So I took a photo, ran it through PimEyes, and it totally connected him to his current photos. We've gotten to the point now where, in many cases, the automated facial recognition is better at doing this than humans are.
Would it work on twins, do you think?
So I have an interesting twin story. So one of the companies that has deployed facial recognition technology, not Clearview AI, but a technology from another company, is Madison Square Garden, which is this huge events venue in New York City. It's where U2 plays and Mariah Carey plays, and the Rangers play there, and the Knicks play there. And Madison Square Garden installed facial recognition technology a few years ago, and it was a technology where you can put a face on the blacklist, on the banned list, and if one of those people comes, you can kick them out. And so they said it was to address security threats, because Madison Square Garden is on top of Penn Station. They said, we could have terrorists trying to come in here. People have been violent at the stadium before. But in the past year, they decided to put enemies on the ban list. And James Dolan, who owns the venue, said, I don't want lawyers coming here who work at law firms who have sued us. And so he put thousands of lawyers on the ban list. And it didn't matter if they were working on the case against Madison Square Garden or not. If you were just working at a firm that sued them, you were banned. And so one of those lawyers has a twin. And every time his twin tries to go to a Knicks game, he gets pulled aside and told that he can't come into the venue. And so he'll have to show his ID and be like, I'm not my twin, I'm not the lawyer. So yes, if this technology gets more widely deployed and you have a bad twin, you're going to have some problems.
Well, and you tell lots of stories in the book about private uses that would have never occurred to me that people could do. And then there's the whole idea of using it in a bar, to identify somebody that you maybe want to find out more about. But Clearview, as you said, although they started out doing it for anybody, I think, that wanted to do it, or that was their intention, eventually just said, we're just doing law enforcement. I don't know if that's a fig leaf for how they really plan to use this technology, but for the moment, that's pretty much what they're doing, which has some pretty scary implications as well. You think it would be great, but it doesn't identify everybody right, and particularly some races.
Yeah, so facial recognition technology is very powerful, and it can work very well. But as one privacy professor put it to me, we're not all unique snowflakes. And there are people in the world that we look like. And the kind of performance of facial recognition technology can really degrade if the image that you're trying to search is pretty low quality. So if it's coming from a grainy surveillance camera, it's not going to perform as well. And so there have been a handful of people that we know of who have been arrested for the crime of looking like someone else.
You tell a story in the book about this poor guy in suburban Detroit.
Yeah, a father of two young girls. He's a very warm and funny person, and he's at work one day in January 2020 and gets a call from somebody who says that they're a police detective and that he needs to turn himself in, that there's a warrant for his arrest. And it was 2 days before his birthday, so he thought it was a joke at first. He thought one of his friends was pranking him. And he said, I'm not turning myself in. I haven't done anything wrong. And when he gets home, a police car pulls up behind him, blocks him in his driveway, and these two police officers start arresting him in front of his wife and two young daughters. And he gets taken to jail, held overnight. Detectives are interrogating him, asking him, were you at this store on this date in 2018? And he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And they show him still from a surveillance camera, and they say, is that you? And it's a photo of a large black man, and Robert Williams is a large black man. And he says, that's all we have in common. This is not me. It doesn't look like me. He holds up the picture to his face. And yeah, it had been a face recognition match. And that's why he got arrested. And he ended up having to hire a lawyer, fight these charges. It is very traumatic when this goes wrong.
Well, if I recall, that was all they had on him. And isn't the idea that law enforcement is supposed to pledge, I guess, to Clearview AI, if nothing else, that they use this as an investigative tool, but not as, prima facie evidence that they found somebody?
Yeah, this is what police officers tell me. They say, this is a very powerful tool, and we want to use it, but we do need to use it cautiously, and that it is supposed to only be a lead when you get a face recognition hit, and you're supposed to do, more building of the case and find more evidence to give you probable cause to arrest somebody. But in this handful of cases, including one case involving Clearview AI in Atlanta, where a man who lived in Georgia was held in jail for a week for a crime in Louisiana, a state he had never been to, they aren't doing all the investigating that they're supposed to, and it is going wrong. And so that's a problem. There's also this other question of, when purses get stolen from stores in New Orleans, should we be looking for the suspect in this database of millions of people? Because that increases the chance that you do get a doppelganger who, they might live in another country or another state. And, in the case of this man from Georgia, he was held for a week for this crime, and the only evidence against him was that he looked like the perpetrator.
And I guess if you've got a driver's license, your photo's out there, no matter how much you are on or not on social media or TikTok or whatever. But is there anything that people can do to protect themselves, and can they claw this back under some of these privacy laws?
Yeah. So if this disturbs you, this idea, yes. This idea that you're in, the Clearview AI database and you don't want to be there. If you live in Missouri, there's not a lot you can do. But if you live in California or Virginia or Colorado or Connecticut, you have a privacy law in your state that says that you have the right to access information that a company holds on you and get it deleted. And so those are powerful laws. And people who live in those states can get themselves taken out of the Clearview AI database. And so it really shows how laws can work to curtail this technology. But it means that basically some of us have better protective faces than others, depending on where we live. The other database I told you about, though, and that you said you've tried, PimEyes, they do have an opt-out. And so if you search yourself there and you find photos of yourself on the internet that you don't want other people to be able to find, you can ask to be taken out of their search results. So I do encourage people to consider that if they're worried about this.
Given how privacy is today, I know that you live in Connecticut, which is one of the states you mentioned. Have you tried to get your photo taken down?
I used to live in Connecticut,
but
I don't anymore. Unfortunately, I now live in New York, and New York does not have one of these laws. So I have not had the ability to get myself out of these databases.
There's, I guess, the question, too, of using this live versus a static photo. I mean, every British crime show you watch now, the first question is there CCTV? If there are cameras all over the place, always watching, are we constantly being recorded someplace that's in a database that Clearview or somebody else can get to?
Yeah, at this point, there's this infrastructure of surveillance, right? And these things could all be connected, but they're not yet. We don't have facial recognition technology running on all these surveillance cameras. We don't have all the footage from all the surveillance cameras going to one central database that we can search. And so that's part of why I wrote this book now, is to say, if we don't do anything, we could go in that direction. And is that the world that we want to live in? That is happening other places. Russia, for example, has facial recognition technology on hundreds of cameras in Moscow, and they can find people in real time and have alerts go off if there's somebody who's wanted by the police. And I talked to a civil liberties organization there, and they said there are doppelgangers who get stopped a lot by police because they look like somebody who is wanted. China also has kind of widespread use of facial recognition technology. They have used it to suppress civil liberties, identify protesters in Hong Kong. They've also used it to name and publicly shame people who wear pajamas in public. So yeah, there's all kinds of uses of this technology that could happen if we don't really think about what we want right now and build kind of a legal and policy infrastructure to control the kind of worst impulses that we might have with the technology.
Is it being used in this country right now, do you think, to spot, say a Black Lives Matter protest or something like that, to create a database that then people might use for ill reasons?
I mean, it could be, right? It was used on January 6th when the attack on the Capitol happened, and the people who were there, rioting, they were taking a lot of photos, they were streaming themselves on social media, and afterwards the FBI made this database of here's all the faces of people that we want to question. And police departments who had access to Clearview AI started going through those faces and trying to identify some of those people. And so, yes, it is already being used in that way. It was used to identify a Black Lives Matter protester in Miami after she threw a rock at the police. And this is what I hear from officers. They say, we don't want to use it to chill civil liberties. We're not trying to identify all the protesters. But if somebody commits a crime, yes, we want to identify them.
Well, even if people start out with the best of intentions, we know how these things end up going. Once the technology's out there, it's out there.
Right. There's always slippage, right? Which is why laws and good policy is important.
Well, and one of the concerning things we were starting to talk about before is that it doesn't work the same on everybody, and particularly on people of color.
This has been a really big issue with facial recognition technology in the past. It was very flawed. And this was because basically the people who were building the technology were primarily white men, and they were making sure that it worked well on them. But people pointed out that it was not working as well for some people as others, researchers like Joy Buolamwini, and the vendors took that to heart. And it was a problem that they could address. And the fix was to train the technology with more diverse faces. And so they did that. They collected faces from the internet, and sometimes they actually specifically went out into the real world to get those faces. Google hired contractors and said, we want people with darker skin. And that contractor, very controversially, recruited homeless people to kind of make maps of their faces. One Chinese company, to get a more diverse database, deployed its technology basically for free in Zimbabwe to collect these faces. And so it's now been trained to work better on all sorts of people. And so it's really come a long way. And it often works better than people realize on diverse faces.
Well, and you mentioned Google. I guess one of the interesting things about the book that's very telling about this technology is that Silicon Valley maybe dabbled in it a little bit and then decided they just didn't want to have anything to do with it.
Yeah, this was so surprising to me because when I first heard about Clearview AI, I thought, wow, I can't believe this company did this first, that they got here, before Google, before Facebook. And then when I did further research for the book, I realized actually Google and Facebook had both developed this technology internally, this ability to kind of take a picture of a stranger and identify them. But both companies decided to hold that technology back. They thought it was too dangerous to release, too risky. And so what Clearview AI did wasn't a technological breakthrough. It was an ethical one. They were willing to do what other companies hadn't been willing to do.
Are there some positive uses for this? I mean, we've been beating up on them quite a bit here during the interview, but I imagine there's some good things about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that using facial recognition to solve crimes, as long as you get the right person and it doesn't lead you to a similar looking suspect who's innocent, that is clearly a positive use case. I mean, I could imagine how this would be useful in my work as an investigative journalist. If I have some kind of event happened and there's footage from it, and I can identify the people who were there and interview them about what happened. Even in kind of casual encounters, you're at a cocktail party and there's someone that you have met 5 times and you can't remember their name, and you just want to quickly find it out so you don't embarrass yourself. I mean, I can imagine all these different kinds of positive use cases that might make us move towards a society where this is really ubiquitous. At the same time, it could be very chilling to not have anonymity in our daily lives, to not be able to have a sensitive conversation over dinner without worrying that a stranger around you might take your photo and connect it back to your identity. Going to the pharmacy and making a sensitive purchase, and somebody just for laughs takes a photo and is like, oh, look who just bought hemorrhoid cream. I mean, there's so many ways it could get away from us. So I really think we need to think very hard about what we want this to look like.
Do you think there's a danger, maybe danger is not the right word, maybe it's a good thing, of a tech lash, so to speak, that, with all of the publicity that not just facial recognition, but AI has gotten in just the last year or so, that we might scale back and become behind the rest of the world?
I think that we're at a moment right now with AI that reminds me of a moment from history. And that is when, in the kind of 1960s, when there were a lot of tiny recording devices that were starting to be manufactured. And it was very easy to bug people and tap phone calls. And there was kind of a flurry of worry about how you would no longer be able to have a private conversation. You could be secretly recorded anywhere you went. And it led the United States to act and pass the Wiretapping Act and make eavesdropping illegal. And the passage of those laws is why the surveillance cameras that surround us, that are, everywhere in America, only watch us and don't listen to us. So yes, I think we're at a moment right now where the technology is worrisome, and we need to figure out a legal and policy infrastructure for it to make sure that kind of we get the best of the technology and not the worst.
Well, not only is the book fascinating, it's obviously very important, particularly right now. Kashmir Hill, thanks so much for sharing your time with us. Appreciate it.
This was amazing. Thank you.